talking about the UX design project now. So I'm going to screen share and just take a look at that slideshow and give you a bit of an overview. Dee, welcome. I know you can't say anything, but you can certainly type. You and Jason can be typing questions and so on. So, and again, the slide deck is on the Google Docs that I'm going to show you. The slide deck is definitely there. Whoops, I did full screen instead of share. Silly of me. Share screen. So I'm going to switch to the slideshow now. So these might look a little bit blurry. They don't come across very big, do they, in the screen? So it depends on your screen quality, how much you're seeing. So if it's all a bit too low res, I guess we just want to focus on an overview of what UX experience is. So we're talking about this whole area because it's a big area of employment. Is everybody seeing that? Is everybody seeing the slideshow now?
Yeah.
Yep, good.
Yeah.
And of course you can go back and look at it, but I mean really it's just to serve as an anchor point while I talk about the project and what you're going to be doing. So just having an understanding of what the user experience is. It is about getting to understand what UX design is about, since it's such a huge area of employment now. So improving the user's experience. You guys are using apps and things all the time. And I guess as with the website, remember we talked about there's two kind of people we are designing for. You've got the business, who's, probably whose approach you do the design. And then you've got the people who are going to use that design. And you as a designer have got to think about both sides of this equation and come up with a solution that's going to help the business, or it could be, not just a business, it could be a social service, it could be any kind of object or service that you're trying to work with. And then you've also got to make sure that your user will come back and use it again, and that's going to help your business. So an example of, this is an example of an app that was, and a website that was produced and was highly successful in Melbourne. And without doing any research, they switched it to Sydney. And it bombed. It was a complete failure in Sydney because Sydney is hilly. Nobody wants to ride their bike around in the inner city of Sydney much. It's not a pleasant experience. It's not Melbourne. So that's just an example of why there's a whole lot of research into the user, and it has real commercial consequences if you don't bother or you just do sloppy research and don't understand your user. So you'll be doing some workshop notes that you have to fill in where you have to sort of go through this process. So we're basically doing the equivalent of a mini boot camp really on UX design, just to give you an understanding of the process. So you are going to design an actual app, but half of the project is really about this part where you step through the process that you would if you were to get a job as part of a UX design team. So the workbook I'm going to give you to work through basically goes through these steps especially to try and understand the user. And there's some terminology we're introducing here as well. And for you guys, for all of us designers, it's quite interesting. When I went to the UX workshop I went to, this whole thing about a design process where you go through and you have multiple ideas and then you brainstorm and do that was all completely new to all these people. Whereas, of course, for graphic designers, this is how you work. So it really is a very natural fit, which is now something suddenly businesses understand that you need this kind of thinking, design thinking, where you come up with multiple solutions, you try to understand what the client wants, and you adjust the design. So it's really a process. They kind of do this thing, it's also, now you'll hear things like sprints, terms like that. So what's happened in a lot of enterprise areas and a lot of businesses, they've tried to introduce this kind of thinking to try, and it's in software development teams as well. So little sprints where you might use the design process to look and problem solve around specific issues when they're developing software. So there's terminology in here that's used by both developers and designers. So the thing here is, like, originally we would have done this in pairs. So the first part of the workbook was meant to be done in pairs, and you can still do that. You just need to arrange with either another classmate to do the first part, and I would still like you to try and do that. So you're actually getting more than one head around this problem. So originally I would have done teams of around 3, so I wouldn't go too much bigger than that. It'll become too unwieldy. So see if you can do that. Don't despair if you can't. You can always pick the brain of someone in your household to do it with, yeah? Because after all, they're all using stuff all the time. So we're going to go through and look at the workbook, and we're going to do some stuff where you'll do these kind of exercises with people. So you can do it with each other as victims, and answer some of these questions. So what you're asking questions about is some generic things to begin with about experiences they've had when ordering food generally. Before we dive into, ordering sandwiches, maybe they've never ordered sandwiches, so you're not going to get any specific things, but probably a lot of people you know and each other would have ordered food. So these are actually called pain points, so things that have gone wrong. So you might identify some of those. So you're actually interviewing someone, and you can, if you're doing it with someone else, you can swap roles and then they interview you. That's if you're doing it with another student. So you're trying to understand all sorts of things about the problem. What is the problem with ordering food? What puts people off? And obviously, just from my own experience, I can think of easy things like, you get the wrong order, you have to go through too many screens before you actually can order the food. So you're being asked to trust that it's going to be a great experience when you've never been in there before, and so on. So there's probably lots of things that have gone wrong. Try and identify some of those typical painful moments when you're ordering food and it goes wrong. Now the other thing are these things called proto-personas or personas. What does that even mean? This is a term that's used in UX design, and it really is about identifying your typical groups of users. So when you start to do this part of the workbook, it'll be asking you to think about the particular group of people that you've identified. So in the beginning, we wanted you to do quite a bit of brainstorming and mind mapping around all sorts of different types of reasons and uses for a sandwich app. So in that, you might identify there are different groups who would like a different kind of app. And so one group might want, they might be really worried about dietary things, maybe they want to lose weight, so that would lead them to want a calorie counter on the actual app. So your first step in the project is to decide what kind of app is it, who's it for. If it's for people who are, like it's for a business, a catering business, then your typical user might actually be another business, and maybe they cater for high-end functions. That's going to be very different to the needs of, say, a tradie who just wants food fast and doesn't really care too much about the calories or the fat content or whatever. So each group of users and each would have quite different personalities, quite different demographics, and so on. So the workbook, well, I'll show you in a minute, it asks you to identify 3 or 4 different kinds of people that would use your particular app. So you'll actually give them a name and they're like a summary of a typical user. Fred is, employed in the construction industry. He likes to get his food fast, so his main concern is getting quick service, and quality is not a big issue for him. Another sort of user for this particular app might be someone who's at home because of coronavirus, having to get sandwiches done quick for lunches and never done it before and freaking out. And they also don't care too much about the ingredients, they just want to satisfy their little customers quickly. Then, that could be a particular kind of just a generic family-friendly, fast, kind of equivalent to a Domino's kind of market app. That's going to be a very different app to one you design for a high-end user, like a company that caters for corporate events that we used to have, and so on. So that's a very different market. So your first step would be identifying what kind of app, who is the market, and of course once you've made those decisions, you can then go off and do an appropriate logo design that'll suit them. So you've got to do some definition first. Once you've defined who it's for, what their demographics are, and who sort of a 4 sample users of it might be, this is what the persona is. So it's a fictional representation of people that show how a group of people with similar traits would use your particular app. So they're not market segments. It is quite different. Yeah. So that's kind of market research terms. So personas a very particularly a UX terminology. Okay, so we start to interview people for that, and what would happen in a UX company is there'd be a lot of interviews, and you would end up grouping certain users together to produce those personas. So it helps you understand exactly what people want from this app before you even start thinking about a logo, a set of colours, or the features that are needed. So it helps you identify the needs in the context of the problem. So you want to know what they do currently, what kind of things does that particular person do, and maybe they don't already order sandwiches, but they already order Domino's, and their behaviour around that is pretty similar to going to be pretty similar to their behaviour and interests around this app. Okay, so you might identify all sorts of emotional things, and that could lead into even things like the colours you use. And this, what frustrates them, is really important. What are the positive things in an ordering experience that make them really glad, and what frustrates them? So you might even look at other apps that you've used or that the people you're interviewing use that they think are really great. They don't have to be food apps. For example, I've got a Teachers Health Fund app that I just discovered the other day. It is brilliant. It lets me photograph a docket, send it in within about 2 seconds, which replaces a paper process and posting things that used to take hours. So, you might know of an app that's not a food ordering app, but it gives you some models for really great experiences, as well as thinking about experiences that really frustrate you. Okay, so iterative, so talking about an iterative design process, you can see they're using the terminology, that's sprint process, so you're doing it really quickly, not spending hours on it. Quick and simple. And so usually you would do this when you don't have a lot of research, but it's also used when you've got a lot of research and you need to summarise it and tell a story to show your client what's the thinking about the people you're trying to service. So sometimes your client, the business, doesn't quite understand their users. They don't know enough about them, and you're, as a designer, very often in the role of explaining that to them. So this is the kind of things that you'll fill in, and I might just switch. I might just switch to just show you one more screen. So this is talking about how the process isn't. I've got to design a sandwich app. here are some ideas, here's my solution. It's not that. It's not that linear process. So you've already had some exposure to that with the prototyping we did for the website, as well as for the final design, where we asked you to do what's called an iterative process, where you test it on the actual users, get some feedback, and then you might adapt it way before you actually launch it. So there's a lot of that testing, which is why software like Adobe XD has these built-in ways of sending out tests for the prototypes. So there's more to these slideshows. I don't want to keep talking and go through everything because we don't want to tackle too much of this job at once. So I'm going to show you the workbook and show you where I'd like you to be by next week. But these are some things to think about when we look at user design, experience design. And one of the things that's interesting about the Learnable is, especially with designers, you can start getting a set of symbols and colours together that help indicate, yes, you got it right, that might be a tick and it might be green. And those are kind of universal symbols and ways of telling people. As they use the prototype, they actually learn very quickly if they need to if there's a call to action, they need to enter some information. That might have a colour associated with it and a shape that they need to type into, or something that alerts them. And there's actually a lot that UX designers taken from game designers who have tutorials that are experiential, as in as you start the game, you actually unconsciously even are training people in the use of certain symbols and ways of working through without having to have a user guide, this kind of thing. If it needs a user guide, you're in trouble. Okay, so this is a really important one, just to get an understanding of where you as a graphic designer fit. So you're at the top of this. So you're not necessarily producing all the architecture and all the actual software, intricacies of coding and all the rest of it, but you would be working at the top level to create that visual usability, and also working with people who are more on top of the functional stuff and getting feedback from them. So it does go up and down, but you've got this really important role as a visual designer to keep all these other people under the same aesthetic and usability, kind of visual usability, so nobody goes off track and does things that don't belong to that branding and system of icons which are helping educate your user. You don't go off track. So yeah, okay, those are good. So considerations. We're gonna do this. We're gonna actually do it in the workbook. Identify the problem. Think about profiles. Think about the context. So does your tradie need to be able to use it ordering on a train on the way home? Or where are they going to use it? Are they going to be outdoors in bright light? How is it actually used? That's the context. And is there anything you can put in there that helps with the physical usability of it? Again, the size of text, colour, not having things that aren't readable in low light, different environments. All those are kind of physical limitations that might come into it. And we also think about things like cultural codes. So are you using symbols and icons that aren't universal, so that when your app is downloaded on the other side of the world, there's just a great big, I don't get this. What does that symbol even mean? It's not telling me anything. And there might be some things you really, really shouldn't use, and you accidentally use the wrong kind of symbol, or it's an ambiguous thing, just doesn't mean anything. Keeping it simple, very important. Remember, with an app, there's not a lot of screen real estate. It's not like a website. So simplicity and lack of clutter, that's really important. So can everybody access it? Can everybody, do they have to have high visual literacy to be able to use it? Do they have to have a lot of literacy full stop to use it? So is it going to be very easy for many, many people from different backgrounds to use? And will it, very crucially, will it work on a whole bunch of different platforms and devices? Can you give them any feedback in the way things change? If you hover over it, if you touch it, does it buzz? Is there anything you can actually do physically to give some feedback? And, you know, ways of interacting, swiping up, swiping down, all those kind of things. So, the learning curve, you know, making sure it's not too hard to learn, that you engage, and yeah, this is the culturally appropriate and understandable symbols that translate across cultures, and colour codes that translate, and some kind of alert system when there's an error. That's also very important. Feedback, that's another feature that I'll be continually reminding you. You might need a feedback screen in it. So I'm going to stop there and go to the actual project and show you, and I will put these movies of apps. They probably won't come across clearly on everyone's screen. So go back to the actual PDF of these slides to see them better. And I will open a couple. I've got them open, and I'm going to go to stop that screen share and do a new one. I will take questions at the end, so don't despair if this isn't making sense to you yet. So I'm just going to show you a couple of the apps that students designed last time. So here's a nice one. So it's a movie like you made with your movie, with your website, sorry. And I'll just play that one through and I'll find it. So just to give you an idea of what people have made. So this one was aimed at I think vegan or vegetarian users. So the whole idea was that it had something about ingredients and so on that then showed them. I'm not sure where she put that. But it does give you a bit of a look at what the feeling of it is. There are some problems with this one in that they haven't put a feedback. Oh, there's the pickup. Let's see if she put a place order. That's good. Okay, what happens next? Yes, she's got a checkout, and that's just like a mock-up of a checkout. And there, right at the end, there's the feedback button and a little message about when it's going to arrive. So that's one example. Do another one for you. I don't know how to swap. I have to keep going back. Okay, I'll show you another one. So this one's called Easy Witch. So you can maybe guess what kind of audience they were aiming it at. So you do need to just define, before you start designing, you need to state quite clearly who this app is intended users are. So just have a look at that. There's your login screen. And look, we've got a choice of Express or your choice. Some ingredients. So we get a sense of how. Remember, you don't have to build every single screen that might be needed. You just have to have enough for that prototype to indicate how it works. There's our prices. And again, we've got a, what do you prefer, pickup or delivery? You get to put an address in. You confirm our payment. And then there's the feedback screen at the end. Okay, so, and a thank you. You can get a thank you after that. So nice. Okay, so I will put more of those examples on there, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what the project is, you know, what's the result of the project before you start looking at the actual workbook. So I'm just going to go and show you the workbook and show you where you should be up to. Let's get rid of some stuff off my screen. Do I have Google Docs open? Yes, I do. So I'll screen share with you in a sec. Alright, so I'll also show you where those resources are. Okay, so going into Google Docs, when you're in there, you want to go to, let me just get there. So I've got to go to that resources folder. Is everybody seeing my screen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So make sure, yeah, mine's got more options obviously, but hopefully you've got your student resources one.
Yeah.
And you know, oh, did I go into the wrong one? No, yeah, you go into Dip Design. Is that the one you've got shared, just Dip Design?
Yeah.
Should be only that one you see. So go into UX Design and we'll have a look at the brief. But actually I might just show you the workbook. So it's this workbook is the sort of evidence of you doing the collaborative part. So you do need to do this first, and not all of it at once. So this is where you're going to follow that process in the slides. So you're going to discuss and record what you think the actual problem is, and this is where you're trying to define what kind of app it is. Who's it for? Way before you start thinking of a logo design. So is it for a high-end user who wants really fancy sandwiches? Is it for someone who's going to the gym all the time? Is the client an actual likely to be a gym and they want an app to go on, be part of what they offer their members? So with recipes and all the rest of it on there, that would have quite different features to one where the client was a catering firm, a catering an app that's designed for a catering company would be quite specific, and it would have options for something like corporate events, maybe weddings, special events. That's going to have to look very different to a kind of a Domino's, look, I'm just an ordinary family, I just want an ordinary meal delivered because I'm stuck in the house with all these kids, etc. So we're looking at different markets. So you want to then, once you kind of have a think about that, what's the actual problem? What's their problem? They want food fast, don't care about the ingredients? Or no, they need really high-end ingredients and they want to know the allergy status of every single ingredient because, they've got specialist needs. Is it for vegans and vegetarians? Yeah, and you'll just have 2 sets of meal plans. Or just one. Is it just for vegans? So they would have a very different set of problems. You've got to do a bit of defining here to tell us what it is that you're actually making. Who's it for? So what are the goals of your typical customers? So then you need to turn around to your teammates and start interviewing them. So this is where we ask about more generic things to try and look at motives of people generally. What is the context of their experience? When do they order food and why? Have they used an app or did they use a website? What was the pain points, the things that went wrong? Then you try to map out a typical journey. So what happens from first to last? Here I'm hungry. Here I get to eat food. What happens in between? Yeah. A lot of steps in between, right? We'd like this process to be as fast and as painless as possible. I'm hungry, I got my food. A satisfied customer. So what's going on in between? What are the steps? So that's quite a lot just to begin with before you actually go anywhere near designing. So you'll make a little diagram to try and identify those steps. So you'll interview fellow students. Like I said, you can also do it with people in your household because, they're users who use apps and websites all the time. So you try to identify those pain points. Where do they experience problems? And then you draw another diagram where you really identify in red or something what are the problems along that lovely, smooth, linear thing we just tried to imagine. And again, you can add more of these, don't just use the ones I've got there. You make your own version of this. what are those steps, and at what point, you might circle them in red on that diagram, at what point are they really upset, and describe what's happening at that point in the process. Because of course you want to use that knowledge to avoid pain in the one you're designing. So you can see that after doing all that, you're going to create the personas. You now, by this point, have said, my problem I'm solving is that vegans need to guarantee their food is high quality sourced and absolutely no meat products and no cheese and all the rest of it, no animal products, whatever. That's their problem, and they need it delivered to the house. Oh, maybe because they're stuck inside or worried about coronavirus. Okay, so it's a very, very good time to be designing a food delivery app, isn't it? Yeah, so it's really timely. So at this point, you're going to spend some time creating your particular personas. Who are they? Remember, that's like a summary. Give them a name. Say how old they are. It's not a particular person, it's a group of people that would be using your app. So if it's for vegans, obviously it might be, there might be an age group you think is more likely, or you might have two different users who are different ages who use it. And you've got to try and identify, you give them a name, and the typical user would be how old, male or female, or that's not relevant. Are they wealthy? Are they likely to spend a lot more to guarantee they've got beautiful ingredients and they want caviar on the list? Or are they an average family and there's no way they want caviar? Okay, and what do you imagine their occupation might be? If you find this a little bit too abstract, of course you could base it around people you know, if you think they represent particular users. So why do you think they would use the app? Yeah, and you've got a couple of those to do. So you're trying to really get a sense of who typical kinds of users are. And so there's usually 3 or 4 categories. I think we've just limited it to 3. How many? Whatever I put in there, 3 or 4. Then you want to, again as a team, you want to sort of have a discussion, having defined those users, and we'll do this virtually, but you can do it at home just with sticker, what do you call them? Sticker pad, post-it notes. You can do it just with that, where you kind of class the things, the functions you think they need into really important, and you actually can just draw this up or just put it on your wall even and have stick-it notes and have the ones that you think are really important up higher and the ones that are easy to make in this corner. The ones you think would be great but are too hard to make go over here, and things that would be nice to have but maybe they aren't really necessary over here. So in the first, you think of all the kinds of different functions that would be needed, and then you weed them out in thinking about these people and what they said was important. You try to class each feature. Do they need a really comprehensive list of what's in each ingredient because safety is such a huge issue to them? Or do they need a calorie counter because they're worried about weight and health? Maybe you're one of your personas. You're designing it for people who are doing, they're busy at home right now doing lots of fitness exercises on video, and when that sandwich gets delivered, it's got to be they've got to be sure how many calories they're getting. That may be a very low value to somebody who just wants some food quick for their family. Yeah, and they've got growing kids, and really counting calories is the last thing they want their children to be exposed to. Okay, so can you understand that's kind of a way of categorizing what then ends up in as a feature, as a function in your actual app? So this is a diagram of how that might go with post-it notes, where you class each each kind of feature and decide what are the ones you're actually going to include in your app. So you're going to keep the most important features and the ones you think you can actually make, and then organize them into more of a flow. So what happens? We open the app, they identify, this is a typical thing, they identify the location, they do this, blah, 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 and so on. And that's a really basic flow. Of course, there are many more steps involved. I'm just showing a few there. And then that's really, the kind of the end point of it. But for next week, so some people have already started and they heard me do this briefing session at TAFE and they're ready to move on to this part. The rest of you, all you need to do for next week is get down to this part where you've identified your personas, you've identified the actual name of the actual kind of app you're going to make and who it's for. So you just need, before next week, you need to get down to the point where you don't need to complete the whole booklet, you just need to get down to the point where you've identified who the app is for, what's the problem you think they need to have solved, and what do they want, what kind of features they may want, what's the context, when are they likely to do it, at midnight, early in the morning, in the middle of the day, what's the context, inside the house, on a train, outside because they're bushwalkers and they need to be able to have something there for when they get home, or they're working in a construction site and they need that food to be there when they get home or be delivered to site. So they need something flexible. What is it that they're doing? You've got to tell me. And then identify those pain points, map out the journey from start to, from hungry to getting the food, and see where it could go wrong. So a little diagram that tells us where things could go wrong. That's really as far as you need to get, because after that you want to actually, before you get too stuck into the features and that second part, this bit, before that you want to start actually designing the logo for the app. You can't do the logo design and sets of icons and so on until you've figured out what problem does this app want to solve and who's it for. So, I'm now going to stop screen sharing and just see if this is making sense to everybody.
Yep.
And are there any questions? Okay, so stop my screen sharing and come back into the session. Do we have any questions?
What about on some apps, they do like coupons and things like that? Can we put that into consideration?
Absolutely, that becomes a feature. Yeah. If you think of your typical user and you think that's actually something that might motivate them to come back and use the app again, if that's been your experience, or the people you interview, if that's been your experience, then of course you would put that in as a possible feature. Yeah. But don't get ahead of yourself.
No,
do the first thing first, because is a family-friendly user, do they need that? Who's more likely to want that kind of thing? So first decide who you're designing it for before you do anything else. More questions?
So like with the workbook, that's what we do in group, but then we go off and make our own app?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And at a certain point, the booklet just tells you to stop. It's not a group thing anymore. And so basically, once you have identified who you're designing for, you collaborate to a certain extent because you're using your fellow students to give you feedback and to talk about which features would be good for your app. So you can get feedback from them. But you actually need to do that process of deciding on features individually but use feedback. The first part is truly a group thing where you're just working with someone else, where you're generally discussing those pain points. And then even with the personas, that's not really, you can talk about it as a group, but you're going to have, each of you needs to identify your 3 or 4 typical users. So that's an individual already. So really the only part that's totally should be done with the group is that initial first 2 to 3 questions where you're talking about the food ordering process generically and trying to identify things that go wrong typically or things that are great. And then you can use each other as a really good resource for, oh, hey, you know, I used this feature on this app and it was terrific. What do you think about that as a feature, as something that people enjoy using? And so that's where working with some other people is great because you can get different ideas about that. And each of you would have had, individually had, good or horrific, experiences with certain food ordering experiences. Like I remember not that long ago having a huge tussle on the phone because it was didn't arrive. And, all I could do was they would only do a refund. They wouldn't actually resend the order. So that was bizarre. And I'm never going back to them again. So, so there's stuff like that. Your friends and your fellow students can give you some pointers about things that have gone wrong for them generically with Domino's, with, doing online food orders of any kind. Yeah. More questions? Any more questions? Jason and Dee, do you need to type any questions in? Just do that if you do have any questions. Or type in, fine, I understand everything. I'm good. Dee's good. Jason, are you good? Yeah, fine.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to assume that you're able to go off and do to start the process. So you're definitely welcome, and encouraged to collaborate with each other. However, if that's too difficult, like Dee and Jason, obviously you don't have mics and visuals that are working. So just turn around to your own family. They've probably ordered food at some point in their lives. They may have done this, and hopefully they tried it online. Could have been a web application they used, not a phone. That's also quite valid. So you guys, if you can't collaborate online with another student in the group, just use your family. It's great. Friends, anyone you can be talking to. Don't rush out and form a big gathering outside, though.
We'll get arrested.
Don't get arrested.
Or fined.
Don't get arrested. All right? So by next week, I'd like to see what you've done with that document in terms of defining who the app is for. And once you've finished that process and you're pretty clear on who you're designing for, who your 3 or 4 typical users are, then, start doing some sketches for the logo design. You can use that same, I've put it on the Google Docs, the same style guide that you've used in the web design and the portfolio. So you can use that again to create a little style guide for your app, and we know that we can drag all that stuff across into Adobe XD. So that's really what we'd like to see by next week, is that the logo design has gone somewhere. It might not be finished, you might be still fiddling with it. And during the week, before that, if you're sketching, you've got 3 or 4 just on paper pencil sketches or some illustrative experiments with colours and different logo variations, and you want to show me, just do a quick photo of it and pop it in an email, or pop it in if you're on the WhatsApp group, then pop it in that, and I can give you some instant feedback via text. If you're absolutely desperate for feedback, you can of course text me and say, can I have a hangout session, just one-on-one with you, because I'm not quite sure about this and I don't want to be in a group discussing it, whatever. So there's all those options available to you if you want some feedback. So we try to run it just like we would the class, that you have 3 or 4 ideas and you get some feedback about which is the best one to go with. And of course, because you are working, some of you can work with each other, you can also get feedback from fellow students about which design seems to be more suitable for the users that you're talking about. So you just run it past them, run it past me, and then, decide which one to actually produce in Illustrator. Okay, I feel like I've talked forever. Anyone else want to say something?
No, it makes more sense now. Like, I looked at the brief and I'm like,
Yeah.
confusing, but now it makes sense.
Yeah. So the brief, it's got a whole lot of bunch of stuff that we had to put in there, and all the things you're doing in that workbook actually cover all those things. So that's the idea of the workbook. All the stuff the brief asks for in terms of research, and that's the other thing. You can throw your development sketches and ideas into that Word document to hand in. So, yeah, that's the idea, that it all gets collected. All the stuff you need to hand in, instead of bits and pieces, you throw your sketches, just do phone photos of them. It doesn't have to be high quality. Any development stages throughout the process, just do a quick screenshot of it. Same for when you do the mapping of features using Post-it notes. Take a photo of what you did at home. You might have used a wall or a bit of paper to do it on, and that just goes straight into the document, and then it's all collected, and you don't have to, worry about bits and pieces. But that's why I've done it this way, is because there's a lot of things asked for in this brief, and practically all of those things are, by completing the workbook, will be covered by completing the workbook. Okay? Yeah. And I think there's one more thing, probably for the the previous X project. I don't know if everybody got the research questions for that. Did I give you that? No. I don't think so. Yeah, so there are some research questions. I might just email that out to everybody so that everybody's got it, and just say, hey, you've got to fill these in. It just actually asks you to have a look at different platforms in that kind of way of putting prototypes together and so on. So it just asks a few questions about that, and it also kind of forces you to go and have a look at InVision as an alternative to the prototype. So if anyone doesn't get their hands on Adobe XD, InVision is the other product that you could use, and you can access that, I think, for free, or at least a free trial online, and you would have to make all your screens in Photoshop and then use hotspots. So please email me if you don't have access to Adobe XD, because there is this nomination I can do, and I've just done it for a couple of people who sent an email with their study at TAFE email, or it might have been study@tafe.net. So that would have been sent to you when you first enrolled, that email address. And apparently that's the only one that can be used to get nominated for being able to access the software at home for free. So do email me with that address if you want to get access to the software for free. Apparently that all became kind of put up in January, February. So yeah, it's taken a while. Adobe promised, it was all promised last year. But yeah, finally apparently there's a process for us to let you have it. So please let me know if you're having trouble with accessing the actual software, and the version issue, which version you've used, that won't be an issue, because like before, I can upgrade and work on whatever version you've got. And by the time you've made the prototype, you can send, like we did with the website, it doesn't really matter because you can send me a movie of it. You can share the developer link and the share for review link, and I can see it anyway. Yep. So lots of ways for me to give you feedback, and I don't think that having different versions is really an issue. Okay, probably TAFE would, if you're doing the TAFE software at home, it's going to be, downloaded online. It would be the most recent version, which I can look at. So not a problem. Some of you might have the older version on your computers. I don't know. Might only be people who were trying to work in at TAFE that ended up with the older version. Right. Any other questions before I stop recording? In fact, I'll stop recording now. That's really the end of the group.